Hello, everyone, and good day. Today, I'm going to be doing a episode 0 of a new series on the channel called sort of Modern Iran. And so today, for this sort of introductory episode, I'm going to be looking at broad concepts of sort of Iranian culture and history, and especially the history as well from the ancient times up until the just before the modern period in the creation of the Sassanid dynasty. So I was supposed to have Hunger with me today, but unfortunately he's having technical issues his end, so sadly he can't make it. So this is going to be more of me just sort of talking and reading, and less of a discussion as I would have liked originally. And for those who watched the stream I did earlier this week with AI Shia Homelander on the prospect of regime change in Iran, and I sort of mentioned this series, and one of the reasons I wanted to do this is there very much seems to be this feeling that regime change in Iran is more likely than you would think, and it may not be in the not too far too distant future. Personally, I think we would need to at least see the death of Supreme Leader Khamenei before that happens. Though he is very old, he's going to be 86 next month. So I think his death could pave the way for some sort of regime change. But I feel though that there's a lot of misunderstanding about Iran, and especially how the current government came to be. And there seems to be this idea that the Islamic Republic is some sort of aberration in Iranian history, that it's some like perverse mutation that has no right to exist. And I just really want to sort of set the record straight and better inform and help people understand that why the Islamic Republic exists, and sort of provide a logical basis as to why it's there. Okay, and so we're going to be covering the modern history, so we're starting in about 1500 AD, which is the rise of Shah Ismail I and the creation of the modern Iranian state under the Safavid dynasty, and then we're going to go all the way up until, at the very least, 1989 and the death of Ayatollah Khamenei, though I potentially might extend that and go a little bit more into more recent history, but at the very least the death of the Ayatollah. So in terms of trying to sort of talk about a more broader aspects of Iranian culture and history. So on this sort of main presentation page, I've got this is a image of a famous sort of engraving that's in Iran. It's called the Nashq-i-Rostam. It was created by the Sassanid dynasty, and in this particular engraving, we've got two figures. On the right, we have Ahura Mazda, or Mud, the deity of the Iran's ancient Zoroastrian faith, and on the left we have the first Sassanid king, Ardashir I. So we have Ahura Mazda is granting kingship to Ardashir, and again, what this is showing is the connection between the ancient sort of Iranian monarchy and this idea of the divine. And what it's a bit harder to see, but if you actually look down at the bottom of the image, you'll see that there are two figures being trampled by the horses. So under Ahura Mazda's horse, we have Ahriman, the evil oppositional deity to Ahura Mazda, and then under Ardashir's horse, we have Artabanus IV, the last of the Parthian Achaemenid kings, the previous dynasty that the Sassanids had overthrown. So again, we're tying together this idea of divine rule with the idea of a moral and divine justice. And we've had a super chat. Good friend Hunger for $20. I'd like to apologise to Hitman in the chat for my absence. Moral of the story, I'm a retard. Don't listen to AI and overclock sensitive PC hardware. Thankfully, we had a great chat in the book just behind you can share. Yes, me and Hunger had a bit of a catch up before the stream earlier on today. And yes, we were able to have a conversation, just not live, unfortunately. Though we should have him back for when we get into the actual meat of this series. So thank you so much, Hunger. Okay. So I should probably also talk about the books and literature we're mostly going to be relying on for the series. So the main book is this absolutely massive tome called Iran, A Modern History by Abbas Armanat. It's about 900 pages long. Really incredible work. Highly recommended if you're interested in this period. That's the main book or text we'll be relying on. Two other books which I also recommend are Iran, Empire of the Mind by Michael Axworthy. That's a very good, broad overview of Iranian history and sort of culture as well. And then the other book I recommend is called The English Job by Jack Straw. And if you're wondering, yes, that Jack Straw, the former Foreign Secretary from 2001 to 2006. He, in his book, The English Job, he's more looking at the diplomatic relationship Iran has had, especially in the modern times, with the West, and how essentially a lot of Iranian history is essentially dealing with or reacting to this sort of quote unquote Western subversion of Iranian of the Iranian nation. And so two other very good books in conjunction to the modern history. The modern history is the main one we're going to be looking at. So I just want to start with a quote from Faru Farrokhzad. So she was an Iranian poet and film director from the sort of early 20th, first half of the 20th century. She died in a car accident in the 1960s, and she sort of described Iranian history as a long stroll through the garden of memories. And again, poetry is a recurring pastime of Iranians and will come up a lot in this series. And if we're going to go back to this idea of the Iranian kingship and monarchy being linked to the divine, Iranian Shahs essentially have this independent role from the priestly class or the clergy, and where they get a lot of their legitimacy from is this concept called, the Old Persian is kfarana, in modern Persian it's farah, and this is roughly can be translated to our English word charisma, and in fact the older word kvarana is the origin of that word in the English language, and they also have to earn their position through quality or gohar, and a failure to rule well means a loss of farah and the fall to revolution or invasion, and that's certainly a recurring theme throughout Iranian history, as I'll get into, and one sort of comment I'll make is very similar comparison to the in China you have the Confucian concept of the mandate of heaven. You lose the mandate of heaven, and invasion or revolution will follow. And there's this very idealistic conception of the Iranian monarchy, and there's this idea called the circle of equity, that a Shah has a responsibility to ensure that his government does not extract too much from his subjects, lest they be unable to produce, and the support base of the people will collapse, and this will lead to invasion and domination. However, there's also this much more Machiavellian view of Iranian kingship, which is Iranian politics as a grand chessboard where the goal is to avoid being checkmate. And it's really fascinating because we in the West, we have chess, but this was introduced to us through our contact with Persian civilization, and it's sort of worth looking at the nomenclature of the various pieces, because what they're called in English is somewhat different to the Iranian context. So it always perplexed me as to why the most powerful piece in the game of chess is the queen. Well, in Iranian culture, the queen is actually called the vizier, and this makes a hell of a lot more sense in that context. So the king or the Shah is a very weak piece and can't do very much, and they're very much dependent on their very ideally highly talented, intelligent viziers. So the viziers often have to get them out of these various debacles and essentially avoid them being checkmated. And also interesting is you have the role of the castle piece, where we also in English call it rook. Well, the term rook is actually derived from the Iranian culture as well, because rook comes from the Iranian word rak, which is rukh, and ruks are these giant birds of prey, which are from Iranian mythology. They're talked about in the Shahnameh, and they also come up in the Arabian Nights. And remember, there's a tale of Sinbad the sailor, and on one adventure he does get into a fight with a rook. And so there's this idea that the Shah is dependent on his viziers, but also has to be wary of these various castles or if we're going to lean into our our knowledge of Bertrand de Juvenel, power cannot brook a rival castle. The castles can help you, but they can also be a threat. And there's a very famous passage from the poet Hafez. Waiting for the rook to make a move, we drive a pawn. On the skeptic's chessboard, there is no room for a king. Just want to address a comment from Shrivd Goji. Hello, I think that Persian history is truly a keystone to Western history and is overlooked by most here. If one looks at Rome, one could say the fulfilling of Rome in Hallo Constantine in Iran. Yeah, that is somewhat true, because ultimately I think, as we'll get into, Christianity was certainly influenced by a lot of the dualistic aspects of Zoroastrianism, especially when you look at something like Manichaeism, which I'll get into a bit later in the stream. If people are interested, I also did a stream of hunger nearly 2 years ago on the concept of Magian civilization. So if you're interested, give that a watch. But another aspect of Iranian culture or politics is this conflict between the central government and the periphery. So whether this is the ancient Persian Empire of the Achaemenids with the various satraps or provincial governors, or later when you have these various sort of Turco-Mongol or dynasties, you have the various ethnic groups or tribes. You've got not just Persians, but you've got Azeris in Azerbaijan. You have the Arabs of Khuzestan. You have even Armenians up in the Caucasus. And you've also got this, going back to poetry, if we look, Iranians have this love of gardening or horticulture. And it's very fascinating when you consider the geography of the country, where 50% of it is mountain or desert, and only 15% of the land is suitable for the cultivation of agriculture. And a lot of the cities are centered on a fort or government building called an arg. And there's then this commercial manufacturing center or bazaar, and then the mosque. And all three of these are interconnected with a Maidan or a public square. And going back to this, to use a bit of a poetic metaphor, there's this almost this view of Iran as this great walled garden under siege from these barbarians that surround it. There's also a tendency, going back to the divine, that Iranian history has a tendency towards messianic characters and fear of the apocalypse. The legacy of Zoroastrianism is significant because with the dualism of Ahura Mazda, or wise lord, with the evil and subversive Ahriman, Ahura Mazda will triumph and be the salvation of the world. One can choose to be saved or be damned. So again, almost very similar to this Christian idea of, rather specifically, in contrast to, in the Protestant Reformation, you have this idea of predestination, that you are predetermined the damned or saved. So again, Zoroastrianism seems to be very Catholic in its idea of, no, you can choose to be redeemed. You are not predeterminedly damned. And then this is going back to the idea of the Iran being a great walled garden. You have this concept of Pardis, or the walled garden paradise. And you can almost say that, the foreign invasion and conquest of Iran, it almost represents a kind of Zoroastrian paradise lost. And later, when we get to the rise of Shia Islam, you can almost say that the struggle for Shia Islam against Sunni Islam manifested in the Shia revolution of the Safavids, that the failures of the Safavids or the various Shiite dynasties is, in a way, a Shia paradise lost. Just want to look at more comments from Shrivd Goji. Now we're looking at it, Rome went from the oligarchic republic to the democratic principate, which shapes itself into the dominant monarchy, and this is in itself entered the divine role of kings. Yes, no, I wouldn't disagree with that in respect to Roman history, but what I would say is that with Iran at its inception, like Rome, had a divine monarchy. These two were very much linked together. And then when you have the empire, again, you have emperors deifying themselves. So again, it's almost like a return to the divine monarchy after an interruption. And then, in other words, Rome becomes Persia-like as it goes on, and this too becomes the bedrock of Europe unto these days. Well, it's important to remember that, Iran, the etymological origin of that term is, and it's the same as Aryan, because the Iranians are Indo-European peoples, so there was definitely cultural links we do have with them, more so than other places in the Middle East. And I mentioned earlier the book Iran Empire of the Mind by Michael Axworthy. Well, again, I think this is very interesting, this idea that Iran is not a nation or an empire that is known for its military glories or its successes. If anything, it's more known for its intellectual and cultural contributions being more prominent, especially when it comes to things like poetry or theology. And it's very important to also, because the priesthood has always been important, especially under the ancient Zoroastrian order, but it has a very new dimension when you come to the Islamic period, especially when you get to the Shia revolution. The ulama or Islamic scholars were more dominant than the imams itself, and so you have the rank of the mujtahids who would issue legal opinions, also known as a fatwa. They have to implement this idea of ijtihad or striving to utilize sources of Islamic law, and their followers are encouraged to taqlid or emulation. So again, you have these great legalistic sort of religious scholars, which are to be emulated in your life fundamentally, and you can also see that how this culminates in someone like the Ayatollah Khomeini, and the sort of almost messianic influence he's had on modern Iran, and also very much in the Sassanid period. There's been this idea that good government and good religion go together, and if one is abandoned, the other, this would lead to a quote-unquote a bad religion. And the Shahs provide order and national justice, where in conjunction, the ulama provide a kind of idiosyncratic justice. So, for example, when it comes to giving these fatwas or opinions, it's very much the opinion of that particular mujtahid. They're not really going off some unified law or legal code. So it's all a bit scattered, to put it another way. And another aspect as well that's worth going over is you've got this conflict between, I guess a better way of putting it is, there seems to be this idea that especially some Iranian nationalists have, that half of Iranian history is like illegitimate because the country was conquered by a non-Iranian people, therefore Iranians weren't sovereign. It's not as, I think that's a bit of a cartoon, gross perversion of what actually happens. And there's a term that I really like called Persianate, which is the states that conquer Iran, but they very much adopt elements of Iranian culture or politics. So, they appoint viziers, they have a divan, or they patronize Persian poetry. So again, Iranian culture has a prestige that they buy into, and then again, that's another tension element we can see. So that is the initial kind of broad aspects I wanted to talk about. I now want to get into the broad sweep of history itself. So here we've got a map of the Achaemenid Empire. So this was obviously Cyrus the Great rises up in, he becomes king of Persis or Parsa, as it was known, modern-day Fars region, the origin of the name of the Iranian language, Farsi. And so he becomes king in 559. He's a vassal of the Median Empire. He starts a rebellion, which he wins and conquers the Medes in 550. And then from there, he moves on to conquer the Kingdom of Lydia in Western Anatolia. And then from there, conquers the Neo-Babylonian Empire and establishing the Achaemenid Empire. And it's his son, Cambyses, who then conquers Egypt. And then obviously you've got Darius's campaigns in the Greco-Persian Wars and establishing dominion on the European mainland. And so just before we get a bit more into the Achaemenids, I want to just look at the origins of the Zoroastrian faith and look at Zoroaster, or Zarathustra as he's better known. So just going to do some reading from Axworthy and Empire of the Mind. The prophet who laughed. But probably rather before the first mentions of the Iranians and their kings appear in the historical records, another important historical figure lived, Zoroaster or Zarathustra, modern Persian Zardusht. That is, he is a historical figure because it is generally accepted that he lived and was not just a man of myth or legend, but his dates are unknown and his experts have disagreed radically about when he lived. Compared with Jesus, Muhammad, or even Moses, Zoroaster is a much more indistinct figure, and little is known for sure about his life. The best evidence suggests he lived in the northeast in what later became Bactria and later still Afghanistan. But another tradition has suggested he came from what is now Azerbaijan, around the river Araxes, and others have suggested a migration from the one locality to the other. As a key figure in the history of world religions and a religious thinker, Zoroaster certainly ranks in importance with those other prophets, but it is also difficult to establish the precise import of his teaching, for the same reason that the details of his life are obscure, because Zoroastrian religious texts that are the main source for both, probably the Avesta, were first written in the form they have come down to us more than 1,000 years after he lived, around the end of the Sassanid era, in the 6th century AD. The stories about Zoroaster they contain are little more than fables, though some of them correspond with information from classical Greek and Latin commentators, showing their genuine antiquity. For example, the story that at birth the infant Zoroaster did not cry but laughed, and the theology combines what are undoubtedly ancient elements with innovations that developed and were incorporated much later. So although Zoroastrian tradition places his birth at around 600 BC and associates him with an Achaemenid Persian prince, Vistaspa, most scholars now believe he lived earlier. It is still unclear just when, but it is reasonable to think it was around 1200 or 1000 BC, at the time or shortly after the migrations of Iranian cattle herders to the Iranian plateau. This view is based on the fact that the earliest texts, the Agathas, traditionally hymns first sung by Zoroaster himself, show significant differences with the latter liturgical language associated with the period around 600 BC, but also the pastoral way of life reflected in the texts, and the absence in them of references to the Medes or Persians, or the names of kings or other people known from that time. It seems plausible that Zoroaster's revelation arose in the context of the changes, new demands and new influences associated with the migration, and the self-questioning of a culture faced with new neighbours and unfamiliar pressures. The religion was the result of an encounter with a new complexity. It was to some extent a compromise with it, but also an attempt to govern it with new principles. Other evidence supports the view that Zoroaster did not invent a religion from nothing, but reformed and simplified pre-existing religious practices, against some resistance from traditional priests, infusing them with a much more sophisticated philosophical theology and greater emphasis on morality and justice in this period of transition. One element to support this is an early tradition that writing was alien and demonic, suggesting that the Iranians associated with it the Semitic and other peoples among them whom the migrants found themselves in the centuries after the migration. Another telling indication is the fact that the Persian word div, cognate with both Latin and Sanskrit words for the gods, in the Zoroastrian context, was used for a class of demons opposed to Zoroaster and his followers, suggesting that the reforming prophet reclassified at least some previous deities as evil spirits. The demons were associated with chaos and disorder, the antithesis of the principles of goodness and justice represented by the new religion. At the more mundane level, they also lay behind diseases of people and animals, bad weather, and other natural disasters. At the centre of Zoroaster's theology was the opposition between Ahura Mazda, the creator god of truth and light, and Ahriman, the embodiment of lies, darkness, and evil. Though in the earliest times, Ahriman's direct opponent was Spenta Mainyu, bounty spirit, rather than Ahura Mazda, who was represented as being above the conflict. This dualism became a persistent theme in Iranian thought for centuries. Modern Zoroastrianism is much more strongly monotheistic, and to make this distinction in others more explicit, many scholars refer to the religion in this early stage as Mazdaism. Other pre-existing deities were incorporated into the Mazdaean religious structure, as angels or archangels, notably Mithra, a sun god, and Anahita, a goddess of streams and rivers. 6 immortal archangels, the Amesha Spenta, embodied animal life, plant life, metals and minerals, earth, fire, and water. The names of several of these archangels, for example, Barman, Ordi Beshesht, Khordad, survive as months in the modern Iranian calendar, even under the Islamic Republic. Ahura Mazda himself personified air and in origin paralleled the Greek Zeus as a sky god. The modern Persian month Barman is named after the Mazdaean archangel Vahumanu, the second in rank after Ahura Mazda, characterized as good purpose and identified with the cattle who were the second class of beings to be created by Ahura Mazda, after man himself. Part of the creation myth in Zoroastrianism is the story that, after all was created good by Ahura Mazda, the evil spirit Ahriman, accompanied by 6 evil spirits matching the 6 immortals, assaulted creation, murdering the first man, killing the sacred bull Vohumanu, and polluting water and fire. The importance of cattle to the nomadic early Iranians is shown by the frequent appearance of bulls and cattle in sculpture and iconography. from the Achaemenid period, but many of these images may have a more specific religious significance, referring to Vohu Manu. The name Ahura Mazda means Lord of Wisdom or Wise Lord. The dualism went a long way to resolve the problem of evil that presents such difficulties for the monotheistic religions. The origin of evil in the world was Ahriman, against whom Ahura Mazda struggled for supremacy, and at least initially permitted a strong attachment to the ideas of free will, arising out of the necessity of human beings choosing between good and evil. Goodness emerging in good actions, judgment after death, and heaven and hell. Some scholars have suggested that within a few centuries, but at any rate before 600 BC, Mazdaism developed in addition a theory of a messiah, the Saoshyant, who would be born miraculously at the end of time from a virgin mother and the seed of Zoroaster himself. But the dualism implied other difficulties, which emerged later. One such was that of how Ahura Mazda and Ahriman themselves came into existence. To explain this, some later followers of the Iranian religion believed in a creator god, Zervan, identified with time or fate, who prayed for a son and was rewarded with twins. The twins became Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. This branch of Mazdaism has been called Zervanism. It was characteristic of the new religion that philosophical concepts or categories became personified as heavenly beings or entities. Indeed, these seem to have proliferated, a little like characters in Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. One example is the idea of the Dana, which according to one later text appeared to the soul of a just man after his death as a beautiful maiden, the personification of all the good works he had done in life, saying, "The one in the world who saw someone sacrificing to the demon, you instead started adoring God. And when you saw someone carrying out violence and robbery and afflicting and despising good men and gathering in their substance with evil actions, you instead avoided treating creatures with violence and robbery. You took care of the just and welcomed them and gave them lodgings and gifts. Whether your wealth came from near or from afar, it was honourably acquired, and when you saw people give false judgments and allowed themselves to be corrupted with money and commit perjury, you instead undertook to tell the truth and speak righteously. I'm your righteous thoughts, your righteous words, your righteous actions, thought spoken, done by you." Elsewhere, the word Dana was used to signify religion itself. Another example is the identification of 5 separate entities belonging to each human being, not just body, soul, and spirit, but also Advanak and Faravasi. Advanak was the heavenly prototype for each human being, associated with semen and regeneration. The Faravasi, though all entities in the spirit world were more active, associated with the strength of heroes, the protection of the living and life, like guardian angels, and the collection of souls after death, rather like the Valkyries in Germanic mythology. These and other personifications or angels prefigure the role of angels in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but also have obvious connections to the idea of forms in Platonism, and many scholars believe Plato was strongly influenced by Mazdaism. Paralleling Ahura Mazda and Ahriman were two principles, sometimes translated as good and evil, but more precisely as truth and the lie, Usher and Druj. These terms recur insistently in the Avestan texts, along with the concept of justice, but also in surviving inscriptions. In Old Persian, the words became Arta and Drauga, and in Western classical texts describing Iran or events in Iran, in the centuries after Zoroaster, there were different currents and separate sects within the Mazdaean tradition, representing both innovations, survivals from the pre-Zoroastrian religions, and various compromises between them. The priestly class, the Magi, listed by Herodotus as a distinct tribe within the Medes, survived from before the time of Zoroaster, and as all priests do, interpreted and adapted doctrine and ritual to suit their own purposes, while remaining remarkably faithful to the central oral tradition. The history of the relationship between Iranians and Jews is almost as old as the history of Iran itself, and some scholars believe that Judaism changed significantly under Mazdaean influence in the period of the Babylonian exile. The logical corollary, the possibility of Judaic influence on Mazdaism, seems to have received less attention. After the conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel by the Assyrians around 720 BC, large numbers of Jews removed to Media, among other places, setting up long-lived Jewish communities, notably in Ecbatana and modern Hamadan. A second wave of deportations, this time to Babylonian territory, took place in the 590s and 580s BC under Nebuchadnezzar, who destroyed the Temple of Solomon in 586. Babylon came under Persian control in the 530s, and many of the Jews returned thereafter, though many of them not until some decades later. The trauma of the Babylonian exile were never forgotten, and it marks a watershed in Jewish history in several ways. One of the leaders of the return from Babylon, the scribe Ezra, is believed to have been the first to write down the books of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses. He did so in a new script, the Hebrew script, used ever since then. That by the Jews before the exile was different. Post-exile Judaism laid greater emphasis on adherence to the Torah and on monotheism. For hundreds of years thereafter, first under the Persian Empire and later under the Hellenistic rulers, diaspora Jewish and Mazdaean religious communities lived adjacent to each other in cities all over the Middle East. It seemed plain that many religious ideas became current currency. The Qumran scrolls indicate some crossover of religious concepts from Mazdaism. Another important and creative period for Judaism came later, after the Maccabean revolt against the Seleucids, and later still, when the definitive version of the Talmud was compiled and edited in Mesopotamia in the 4th and 5th centuries AD, again in the Iranian context under the Sassanid Empire. It is a controversial subject, and the relative obscurity of Mazdaean and Zoroastrian in Western scholarship until recent times has helped to conceal the influence of Mazdaism on Judaism, but as further work is done, the more significant it is likely to be found. Perhaps the strongest indicator is the positive attitude of the Jewish text towards the Persians. There are a number of contradictions between the latter practice of Zoroastrianism, as it has come down to us in the written scriptures, and the apparent norms of the Mazdaean religion at this earlier stage, and many of the problems are difficult to resolve. It is a complex picture, but the concepts of heaven and hell, of free human choice between good and evil, of divine judgment, of angels, of a single creator God, all appear to have been genuine early features of the religion, and were all hugely influential for religions that originated later. Mazdaism was the first religion, in this part of the world at least, to move beyond cult and totemism to address moral and philosophical problems with its theology. From an individualistic standpoint, I laid emphasis on personal choice and responsibility. In that limited sense, if in few others in this context, Nietzsche was right. Zoroaster was the first creator of the moral world we live in, also spake Zarathustra. They're referencing Nietzsche's work of the same name. And just to expand on this, there's this concept of this religion at this period of time in history called the Axial Age. It's very much an interest of by Max Weber, which is you had the shift in religion from this older paganistic, tribalistic household religion and ancestor worship to these great sort of messianic prophets and monotheistic gods. So you've got Zoroaster and Zoroastrianism. You have the Siddhartha Buddha and Buddhism. You obviously have Moses and Judaism. You obviously got Jesus Christ and Christianity. The list goes on. And so that just to add some wider context to what Axworthy was just talking about at length there. And so, of course, going back to the Achaemenids, so it should be noted that the Achaemenids, though they were Zoroastrianism, they were not actually as zealous as many later Iranian dynasties would be, and they largely were very tolerant of the other faiths, religions of the empire, so long as they paid their taxes. And it's also really interesting because a lot of this stream is about Iran, and you could almost say Iranian identity. And though this idea of Iran is as old as 1000 BC, the idea of Iran Zamin, or the land of Iran, what did the Persians call the empire? They just called it Zasha. In Old Persian, that's X-C-A-C-A. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Zasha in modern English just means the empire or the kingdom. There is no greater concept of Iranian nationhood or an Iranian state. It's just simply these people from Persia have almost conquered this empire, and it is a union of all these different peoples of various faiths and religions all unified in this grand imperial structure. And so, again, almost like a formalized sort of imperial diversity, if you will. And people who are interested, Apostolic Majesty did a very good stream of Semiagog about a year ago on imperial diversity. And from that point, obviously after Cyrus, you then have the short reign of his son Cambyses. Cambyses dies only after about 10 years, and then there's a brief civil war and fight over the throne. And before you then have the coming of Darius, who is Cyrus's son-in-law, because he marries Cyrus's daughter, Atosha. And he's, in some ways, is really what sets up the administrative model for what the Persian Achaemenid Empire would be. I just want to do another reading from Axworthy and Empire of the Mind, just further going over the importance of Darius and this change. Cyrus was succeeded by his son Cambyses, or modern Persian Cambodia, who extended the empire by conquering Egypt, but in a short time gained a reputation for harshness. He died unexpectedly in 522 BC, according to one source by suicide, after he had been given news of a revolt in the Persian heartlands of the empire. An account of what happened next appears on an extraordinary rock relief at Bishtam in western Iran, about 20 miles from Kermanshah, above the main road to Hamadan. According to the text of the carving, executed in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, the revolt was led by Magian priest Galmata, who claimed falsely to be Cambyses' younger brother, Bardia. Herodotus gives a similar version, saying that Cambyses had murdered the true Bardia some years earlier. The revolt led by Galmata seems to have drawn forth some social and fiscal grievances, because one of his measures to gain popularity was to order a 3-year remission of taxes, another to end military conscription. Pressure had built up over the decades of costly foreign wars under Cyrus and Cambyses, but Galmata also showed strong religious enthusiasm or intolerance, because he destroyed the temples of sects he did not approve of. An Iranian revolution led by a charismatic cleric seizing power from the oppressive monarch, asserting religious orthodoxy, attacking false believers, and drawing support from economic grievances. In the 6th century BC, how modern that sounds. Yes, very much echoing much later with people such as obviously Shah Ismail and the revolution of 79 under the Ayatollah. But within a few months, Galmata was dead, killed by Darius or Darius and a small group of Persian confederates, a killing that sounds more like an assassination than anything else. That the carving at Bicetun was made at Darius's orders, and it presents his version of events as put together after he had made himself king and the revolt had finally been put down. The carving itself says that copies of the same text were made and distributed throughout the empire. And what a revolt it had been. Babylon revolted twice, and Darius declared that he had fought 19 battles in a single year. It was really a series of revolts, affecting all but a few of the eastern provinces of the empire. The Bicetun carving illustrates this by showing a row of defeated captives, each representing a different people or territory. Whatever the true nature of the rebellion and its origins, it was no simple palace coup, affecting only a few members of the elite. It was just the first of several religious revolutions, or attempted revolutions, in Iranian history, and it was no pushover. Bicetun was chosen for Darius's grand rock carving because it was a higher place, perhaps already associated with the sacred, close by where he and his companions had killed Bardia Galmata. The site at Bicetun is a museum of Iranian history in itself. Aside from the Darius rock relief, there were caves that were used by Neanderthals 40,000 years ago or more, by many other generations later. Among other relics and monuments, there was a rock carving of a reclining Hercules from the Seleucid period, a Parthian carving depicting fire worship, a Sasanian bridge, some remains of a building from the Mongol period, a 17th century caravanserai or caravan, and not far away, some fortifications apparently, dating from the time of Nader Shah in the 18th century. Many historians have been suspicious about the story of the false Bardia. The Bicetun carving is a contemporary source, but it is plainly a self-serving account to justify Darius' accession. It is confirmed by Herodotus and other Greek writers, but they all wrote later and would naturally have accepted the official version of events if other dissenting accounts had been stamped out. Darius was not a natural successor to the throne. He was descended from a junior branch of the Achaemenid royal family, and even in that line he was not preeminent. His father was still living. Could a Magian priest have successfully impersonated a royal prince some 3 or 4 years after the real man's death? It is not rather suspect that Darius also discredited other opponents by alleging that they were impostors. If the story was a fabrication, Darius was certainly brazen in the presentation of his case. In the Bicetun inscriptions, the rebel leaders are called liar kings, and Darius declares, appealing to religious feeling and Mazdaean beliefs about Arthur and Druge, "You, whosoever shall be king hereafter, be on your guard, very much against falsehood. The man who shall be follower of falsehood, punish him severely." And Ahura Mazda brought me aid and the other gods who are, because I was not disloyal. I was no follower of falsehood. I was no evildoer, neither nor I nor my family. I acted according to righteousness, neither to the powerlessness nor the powerful did I do wrong. And again, this is what I have done. By the grace of Ahura Mazda have I always acted. Whosoever shall read this inscription hereafter, let that which I have done be delivered. You must not hold it to be lies. Perhaps Darius protested a little too much. Another inscription in Darius's words from another site reads, "By the favour of Ahura Mazda, I am of such a sort that I am a friend to right. I am not a friend to wrong. It is not my desire that the weak man should have wrong done to him by the mighty, nor is it my desire that the mighty man should have wrong done to him by the weak. What is right, that is my desire. I am not a friend to the man who is a lie follower. As a horseman, I am a good horseman. As a bowman, I am a good bowman, both afoot and on horseback. And that's a part of this text, though telescoped here from the original, echoes the famous formula from Herodotus and other Greek writers that Persian youths were brought up to ride a horse, to shoot a bow, and to tell the truth. Darius was pressing every button to stimulate the approval of his subjects. Even if one doubts the story of Darius's accession, the evidence from BC-1500 and his other inscriptions of his self-justification and the use of religion by both sides and the intensive fighting that followed the death of Cambyses nonetheless stands. It's a powerful testimony to the force of the Mazdaean religion at this time. Even the suppressors of the religious revolution had to justify their actions in religious terms. Although Darius by the end reigned supreme, the inscriptions give a strong sense that he viewed himself was nonetheless subject to a powerful structure of ideas about justice, truth, and lies, right and wrong, that was distinctively Iranian and Mazdaean. And up here on the screen, I've got this carving at BC-1500. So on the left, you've got two Persian immortals, and you've got Darius himself, sort of stomping on, Bardia, or this, revolutionary priest figure. And then you've got these various subjects of his empire lining up to pay homage. And then you've got the obviously the Zoroastrian royal divine symbol overhead, and that's an inscription or symbol you see on many works of the Achaemenids, including Achaemenid. And obviously from here, I think in some ways the Persian Empire really peaks under Darius, because obviously he launches the Persian Wars where he is defeated. Obviously his son Xerxes carries on these campaigns and again is defeated. However, throughout the 4th century BC, they are able to leverage some influence due to the conflict between Athens and Sparta in Greece. Though, however, after you have a civil war between two princes, you have obviously a increase in the influence of the Greeks. For example, the Persians love to use Greek mercenaries in their various civil wars or revolutions. So very famously, you have Xenophon and his 10,000 Greek mercenaries in the Anabasis. But of course, we have the rise of Alexander of Macedon, Alexander the Great. If people are interested, I did do a pair of streams of AI Shia Tori on Alexander the Great and his conquest of the Persian Empire. That is behind the paywall, so you will need to become a member in order to watch that. But I'll briefly surmise that obviously Alexander conquers the empire in a period of less than 10 years, which is an absolutely incredible feat. But what's really fascinating is we really see the first time that despite a foreign power conquering Iran, the influence of the Achaemenids seeps through, because Alexander adopts many aspects. He starts to wear Persian dress. He starts to adopt many aspects of Persian government. He retains the satrap system. He takes a Persian wife. He encourages many of his officers to take Persian wives as well. And even if it's to be believed, according to the historian Diodorus Siculus, when he died, his will was found. In his will, he had claimed that he wished to, have execute this grand sort of ethnic redistribution throughout the empire. So we're going to uproot Greeks and put them in Persia, and we're going to uproot Persians and put them in Greece. So this sort of grand, sort of bloody cultural mashing up of the whole population. That also leads to a theory as to why Alexander died, because he didn't die of a fever. He was actually poisoned or murdered, because the ultimately these Greek officers did not want this implementation. And it's from here we have the civil wars, or wars of the Diadochi, the wars of the successors, and the rise of a certain Seleucus Nicator, Seleucus the Victor, from his satrapy in Babylonia, which he's granted after the First War of the Diadochi. He's able, with the help of Ptolemy, able to defeat the Antigonids at the Battle of Gaza, and from Babylonia he's able to expand into the eastern provinces, conquer Iran, and then as a result of the Fourth War of the Diadochi, he's then able to conquer, most of the Levant, with the exception of Palestine, and he's also able to conquer, as you can see, a good swathe of Asia Minor as well. And he very nearly conquers Greece after he defeats the the lord of Thrace and fellow Didotia Lysimachus, if not for his assassination in the aftermath of that in 281 BC. However, the Seleucids themselves have their own decline and downfall after sort of peaking under the reign of Antiochus III. And one of the reasons for their decline is that they're very Greek-centric, and though keeping the satrap system, they don't really allow any sort of sense of local rule, with the exception of Persis or Fars itself, because they allow a local dynasty called the Phraticara to rule. And yes, so by not employing sufficient influence from Persian or Iranian culture, you start to see this resentment and many revolts against the Seleucid rule. And it's from this point, actually, that around the time of Antiochus III, of actually just before he comes in, you have this sort of encroachment into northeastern Iran of a group of nomads from Central Asia called the Parni. They conquer the region of Parthia here in the northeast, and you have the creation of the Parthian kingdom by its first king, Arsaces I, and the benefactor of the Arsacenid dynasty. And throughout the 2nd century BC, as the Seleucids decline and contract, as various satrapies rebel, the Parthians come in and become the new overlords. And this sort of process continues until eventually that under Mithridates II, who's seen as the greatest of the Parthian kings, who reigned from 124 BC to 91 BC, he essentially almost finishes off the Seleucids in Iran and Mesopotamia, and leaving a rump Seleucid state in Syria, which is gobbled up by the Tigranes the Great of Armenia. And the Parthians are interesting because, though being this nomadic people from Central Asia, they do steadily adopt many aspects of Persian court culture. So they adopt Zoroastrianism. They also are somewhat syncretic because they try to fuse Greek elements in as well. They're known as Philhellenes, or friends of the Greeks, and they put on many sort of plays of the Greeks. For example, there's a famous anecdote after the Battle of Carrhae, where the Roman triumvir Crassus is defeated by the Parthians. He's executed by having gold poured down his throat, but his head is then used as a prop in the Greek play Bacchae by Euripides, because that play does require a head to be used as a prop. So there's an interesting anecdote about the syncretic culture of the Parthians, this fusion of the Greek and the Persian. It's also important that the Parthians actually use Greek in terms of their currency, so all of their coinage is in Greek, for example. But as time goes on, they themselves enter decline, because when we get to the period of the Roman Empire, when we have Emperor Trajan, he launches a very successful campaign against the Parthians, and he's actually able to conquer Mesopotamia, which also included the Parthian capital of Ctesiphon, and also conquer Armenia. These provinces were later handed back by Trajan's successor Hadrian, because he believed that the empire was somewhat overextended and was better trying to preserve the boundaries. But obviously, it was a significant show of weakness by the Parthians to lose their these core territories in such a fashion. And it's then from there that we have the coming of the Sassanids. So the Sassanids are the inheritors of the legacy of a older ruler. So like the Phraticara before under the Seleucids, the Parthians give the Sassanids the governorship of Pars, or the Pars region. So with Sasan, this leader being given the territory, Sasan, hence Sassanid, we get to the 3rd century AD, and we have the rise of the first Sassanid king, Ardashir I, who we saw on the opening slide of this presentation. Ardashir I defeats and kills Artabanos IV from the Battle of Hormuzgan in 224 AD, and 2 years later is crowned Shah, or king, in 226 AD. And the Sassanids are fascinating because after this sort of syncretic, the Seleucid period of Greek rule, and then this sort of syncretic period between, the Persian, Greco-Persian Parthians, you almost, in a way, the Sassanids are almost like a national revival for the Iran because there's several reasons for this. One, the Sassanids do away with the Greek coinage, and all coinage is now to be done in Persian. Not only that, on the reverse of all their coins, other than the likeness of the monarch, they also have a Zoroastrian fire temple because though all previous dynasties were Zoroastrian and it was the national religion, the Sassanids really take it one step further because whereas previous dynasties had allowed local religions to flourish as long as the populace were loyal and paid their taxes, the Sassanids take this to a new level where they essentially impose Zoroastrianism on their subjects. They build fire temples everywhere. They persecute people for not converting, etc., etc. So you can almost say that the Sassanids are almost like Zoroastrian fanatics. And what's also an interesting point to bring up is I mentioned earlier that the Achaemenids, their empire was just called the Zasha or the Empire. Well, in my mind, the Sassanids is this where you really get the beginnings of this concept of Iran as an actual nation state, because the name they pick or they go with is Iran Shah, or in modern Persian, that means the domain or state of Iran. And the concept of the Shah, or Shahr, again, not Shah as in Shahansa, King of Kings. Shah is the word for a walled city or essentially. And so there's this, again, going back to this idea of a walled fortress or defenses. So Iran is literally, we are a national people in our national fortress, and we are going to drive out and exterminate any heretics or foreign subversives, and we are determined to be our own sovereign independent people and within our domain. And this is a recurring theme because obviously when we get into the series proper and we're talking about the Safavids, but when the Safavids create, when Shah Ismail becomes the Shah in 1501, the name he picks for Iran is the Mamalek-i Maruse Iran, or the guarded domains of Iran. So again, this link back to the concept of Iran Shah. Right. And it's also from this point that after not only defeating Artabanus, the Sassanids then further embellish their prestige through defeating the Romans in several wars. So this is largely under Ardashir's son, Shapur I. So here, this is another carving from the Nashgir Rostam. Here you've got Shapur on horseback, and he's receiving homage from two Roman emperors. Here we have Philip the Arab and Valerian, two emperors he both defeats in battle, and Valerian he actually captures in battle and was ransomed back at quite a hefty cost to the Roman treasury, and this is actually around the time of the crisis of the 3rd century. So as Rome is waning, Persia is again rising. It's also important looking at many of the government reforms that are implemented by the Sassanids. So they significantly centralized the state from whence it was under the Parthians. They create many new court positions such as the Dibir or scribe, the Gansvar treasurer, and the Dadwar judge. There's also this deliberate distinction between Iran and non-Iran, which they call an-Iran. So again, us versus them is all, again, linking this all back to Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. There is truth and there is lies. There is good and there is evil. Again, it's all interconnected. And furthermore, you can almost say that Zoroastrianism is then codified into because beforehand the doctrine was a little bit haphazard. There wasn't really an agreed universal doctrine for the religion, but under the Sassanids they really codify it into an agreed orthodox doctrine. And you also get the springing up Axworthy mentions the rise of Zervanism. That's fascinating because this takes the idea that Ahriman and Ahura Mazda are both twin brothers and are the sons of another deity called Zervan. And Axworthy draws a comparison between Ahura Mazda and Zeus. Well, you can almost draw a comparison between Ahriman and Hades. And to take this to Zervan, and Kronos, which is especially fitting considering Kronos is the god of time, and Zervan is also a representative of time in Iran. So it's fascinating how all sort of cross-pollination of these ideas. And there's also interesting is in Zervanism, though it wasn't the national sect, it was promoted by the Sassanids as a kind of as a cult movement, and there's many substrates of Zervanism. And I mean, what's most fascinating is you've got one called fatalistic Zervanism, which again is linked to this idea that because Ahriman and Ahura Mazda are twin brothers, Zervan promises to Ahura Mazda. Well, what Zervan decrees is that when my son is born and brought into this world, he shall be the ruler. And while obviously they are being gestated, Ahriman very sneakily makes sure he's born first, meaning that Zervan has to bestow rulership of the universe to the evil Ahriman and not the good Ahura Mazda. So Zervan says to his son, okay, you may rule for millennia, but once the millennia is over, your brother will overthrow you and take over. And so there's almost this idea that there's going to be this grand, sort of almost like a Zoroastrian second coming, where Ahura Mazda is going to become dominant and all is going to be right with the world and evil is going to be driven out. And in fatalistic Zervanism, there's almost this kind of melancholy associated with that, where as the Sassanids decline and things start going to pot, there's this idea of we need the second coming to happen. As if the second coming doesn't happen, then we won't be able to be saved as a nation. And I also want to look a little bit at Manichaeism. So I just want to do another reading from Empire of the Mind by Axworthy. Another phenomenon that emerged in the reign of Shapur was a new religion, Manichaeism, named after its originator, the prophet Mani. Aside from a more or less vague idea of a dualistic division between good and evil, Mani and his doctrines are obscure to most people today, but on closer examination, his ideas and his movement turn out to be enormously influential in surprising ways, especially in medieval Europe. Mani was born in April 216 in Parthian, Mesopotamia, of Iranian parents descended from a branch of the Achaemenid royal family who had moved there from Hamadan, Ecbatana. There's a story that he was born lame, and some have suggested that that his pessimism and his disgust at the human body had something to do with that. As with other founders of world religions, he was born into troubled time and place. His parents seem to have been Christians, and he was strongly influenced by Gnostic ideas in his formative years. The Gnostics were an important sect of early Christianity, though some believe their ideas predate Christianity, incorporating Platonic ideas. Similar movements in Judaism and even later Islam have been identified and labeled Gnostic. Broadly, they believed in the secret knowledge, gnosis, that derived from a personal, direct experience of the divine. At some point between about 240, Mani claimed to have received a revelation that told him not to eat meat or drink wine or sleep with women. The doctrine of Mani incorporated Christian elements, but depended heavily on the creation myth, if it can be called that, derived from Mazdaean concepts, particularly the pessimistically and deterministically inclined forms of the branch of Mazdaism called Zervanism, which had been particularly important in Mesopotamia for several centuries, drawing on indigenous traditions like that of astrology. Put simply, the creation of Manichaeism was a quasi-dystopic creation in which the good, the light, had been overwhelmed and dominated by the evil, the demonic, identified with matter. Through copulation and reproduction, inherently sinful, evil had imprisoned light, the good spirit, in matter and had established the dominance of evil on earth. Jesus was able to liberate man from this miserable condition, but only briefly, and the only real hope was the eventual liberation of the spirit in death. This dismal and ugly vision of existence obsessively proliferated many personifications and principles derived from Mazdaism, and was presented as a religion of liberation from material existence and evil. Mani wrote down a series of religious texts and liturgies, many of which were quite beautiful. He was allowed to preach the new religion all over the Sassanid Empire after a meeting with Shapur in 243, at which he impressed the Shah favourably. Presumably, the king failed to question him too closely, but Shapur was distinguished by a tolerant attitude to religions, including Judaism and Christianity. It is tempting to wish that he had made an exception in Mani's case. Mani accompanied Shapur in some of the campaigning that year against the Romans, which is coincidental because the great Neoplatonist Plotinus was apparently accompanying the Roman emperor for the same campaign on the other side. The teachings of Mani spread rapidly and widely and beyond Persia into India, Europe, and Central Asia, where they survived longest as an open rather than persecuted underground movement, yielding most of the authoritative texts and which Manichaeism is understood by academics today. Mani organized teams of scribes to translate and copy his writings into different languages. His followers formed a hierarchy of believers with an exclusive elect of Pharisaic priests at their head, who were able to follow the purity rules and the rules of abstinence and chastity, and the other life-hating mumbo-jumbo to their fullest extent. But everywhere, the sect was despised and declared heretical, especially by the Mazdaean Magi, but also by the Jews and the Christian Church, and even by Gnostics like the Mandaeans. Eventually, Mani returned from his travels after Shapur's death to a less tolerant atmosphere, and the Magi, who hated and anathematized him more than anyone else for his subversion and his distortion of their own beliefs, were able to have him imprisoned and killed in February 277, apparently by being crushed over a period of 26 days by some very heavy chains. But by then the damage was done. It would be foolish to attribute all the evils of religion to Mani, but he does seem to have done a remarkably good job of infecting a range of belief systems with the most damaging and depressing ideas about impurity, the corruption of material existence, and the sinfulness of sexual pleasure that anyone could have ever come up with. Of course, his notions, especially those about the corrupt and sinful nature of sexual relations, were useful also to those with a wish to elaborate metaphysically upon misogynistic impulses. Again, unfortunately, Axworthy has a tendency to shit-lib screeds every now and again in this book. It's good overall, but it does annoy me. To those with a deterministic bent too, his thinking was a kind of Pandora's box of malignity, the particles from which went fluttering off in all directions on their misshapen wings. As Belsani said, Mani seems to have constructed myths out of a sense of the monstrosity of existence. Myths that have the particularly unpleasant characteristic of not being natural and rising from below, not based on a wide-ranging religious sociality like the Zoroastrian ones, for they are almost the personal dreams of an exhausted and maniacal intellectual. But his ideas were complex, varied, and innovatory, and not all bad. They may have had some influence on Islam subsequently, like Muhammad, later Mani, had declared himself to be the seal of the prophets, and there are other parallels, though the central tenets of Islam were intrinsically anti-Manichaean in spirit, and the Prophet Muhammad was clear that all of the sects, all will be saved except one, that of the Manichaeans. Despite the condemnation heaped on the heresy, it seems to have continued as a tendency and as an underground sect, but the most startling story is that of this influence in the West. Of all the fathers of the Christian Church, probably the most influential was St. Augustine of Hippo. Augustine wrote wonderful books that explain the Christian religion to the uneducated, explain the downfall of the Roman Empire in Christian terms, absolving the Christians of blame. Some, like Gibbon, have remained unconvinced, explained in touching and humane terms his own life, his own sense of sin, and his own late conversion to Christianity. Our Lord may be chaste, but not yet. His presence in the thought of the Church in later centuries was dominant. He also explained the reasons why Manichaeism was heretical in a Christian context. But the remarkable fact is that before he converted to Christianity, Augustine had been an avowed Manichaean, had converted others to the sect, and may have served as a Manichaean priest. It's been disputed, but the imprint of Manichaeism on Augustine's thinking is obvious and heavy. Many of the ideas that Augustine's teaching successfully fixed in Catholic Christian doctrine, notably that of original sin, strongly associated by homosexuality, predestination, the idea of the elect or the saved, and notoriously the damnation of unbaptized infants, originated at least partly in debates that had been going on early within the Christian Church, though those discussions had been influenced in turn by similar Gnostic ideas to those who had inspired Mani. But many of these key concepts, especially the central one, original sin, but also show a striking congruence with Manichaean doctrine. Surely Augustine could not successfully have foisted upon the Christian church Manichaean ideas that the church had already declared heretical. Yeah, that seems to have been what happened, and Augustine was accused of doing precisely this by his contemporaries, notably by the apostle of free will. Pelagius, who fought long and hard with Augustine over precisely these theological problems in the early years of the 5th century and lost, was himself declared a heretic, perhaps the most damaging decision ever taken by the Christian church. As pursued later by Western Christian church in medieval Europe, the full grim panoply of Manichaean Augustinian formula emerged, blighting millions of lives and still exerting their sad effect today. The distaste for the human body, the disgust for and guilt about sexuality, the misogyny, the determinism, and the tendency to irresponsibility that emerges from it, the obsessive idealization of the spirit and disdain for the material, all distant indeed from the original teaching of Christ. One could argue that the extreme Manichaean duality of evil materiality and good spirituality emerged most strongly in the heresies like those of the Cathars, the Bogomils, and the rest, that the church pursued most energetically, the same Bogomils from which the English language acquired the term bugger. The great scholar and Persianist Alessandro Bassani, for whom I've taken much of my account of the Manichaean beliefs, doubted the connection with these Western heresies, but many of their beliefs and practices show the close identity with those of Manichaeism, which is not easily discounted. The energy of the medieval church's persecution of the Cathars and others derived really from the dangerous similarity between their doctrines and orthodox ones. They merely carried orthodox doctrine to its logical extreme. The church was trying to destroy its ugly shadow. The Eastern Orthodox Church sensibly never embraced Augustinian theology to the same extent. The real opponent to Augustinian orthodoxy was Pelagianism, the simple, natural appeal of which was such that it never quite really died out, a golden thread sometimes concealed running through medieval thought to emerge again in Renaissance humanism. If ever a Christian thinker deserved to be made a saint, then surely Pelagius did. If ever a pair of thinkers deserved Nietzsche's title, Weltverleumder, world slanderers, then they were Mani and Augustine. To return to Persia from this excursion, we should remember that Manichaeism was condemned by the Mazdaean Magi as a heresy at an early stage, and that it is more correct to see it as a distortion of Iranian thinking, or indeed as an outgrowth of Christian Gnosticism dressed in Mazdaean trappings, than as a representative of anything enduring in Iranian thought. Again, a fascinating passage on the cultural legacy of Manichaeism. I mean, I don't quite agree with everything, especially when he's talking about a lot of the sort of demonization of Christian theology, but still fascinating nonetheless. So it seems Axel has a high inheld belief in the goodness of mankind, which I don't have. However, there have been many church writers who have written that Augustine, though hallowed, was too stark. No, I suppose that's a fair point. Right, so from here, I want to go back to the Sassanids. So obviously, the Sassanids ruled for about 400 years or thereabouts, which is a very long period, actually not too different to the period of the Parthian rule. They really reached their peak under Khusro I, who is the longest reigning monarch in Iranian history. He rules for about 60 years, from about 518 to about 578, and his reign is roughly contemporaneous with that of Justinian, and he's even able to win some victories against the Byzantines on his western frontier. And later on from there, we then have obviously Khusro II, who was installed with the aid of the Byzantine Emperor Maurice. However, when Maurice himself is overthrown by I'm forgetting the name now. But Maurice is overthrown by one of his officers who rebels against him, and using this as a pretext, Khusro II invades, and you have the great, Byzantine-Persian war that lasts about 20 years, from it's about 608 to about 6228. So we can see here that most of the Byzantines' eastern territories, so the Levant, Southeastern Anatolia, Egypt, are all conquered by the Sassanids. And so had they been a little bit more successful in this war, you possibly could have seen like a recreation of the old Achaemenid Empire under the Sassanids. However, Emperor Heraclius, the exarch of Africa, comes new emperor. He leads a campaign. into the heartlands of Armenia and into the heartlands of the empire itself, and this is enough to force the withdrawal of the Sassanid armies, who are then defeated, and then you have the end of this great war with both empires exhausted. And then from here we pave the way for the Arab conquest of Iran. And so obviously around 4 years after the end of this Byzantine-Persian war, the Prophet Muhammad is able to unify the Arabian Peninsula under his rule. He does this in 630, so 2 years rather, and then dies in 634. And obviously his successor, Abu Bakr, reconsolidates the Arab holdings in the peninsula, and it's under the second Caliph, Omar, that the Arab conquests are launched proper. At first, you just have a series of skirmishes in Syria and Iraq. The Sassanids, at this time, because actually after the death of Khusro II, he's deposed, and you have a 10-year civil war, and then you have the last Sassanid monarch, Yazdegerd III, become Shah. Though I think he's about 10 years old. He's a child when he becomes Shah in 632. And from this point, the Sassanids early in the war are able to see some success because they are able to win the Battle of Al-Jazir in 634, but the Arabs retreat. They focus on defeating the Byzantines first, and the Arabs defeat the Heraclius at the Battle of Yarmouk in 636, which allows them to conquer Syria, and then from there they then redouble their forces into Iraq, and they defeat the Sassanids at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, which allows them to conquer Iraq, and then from there they fight 2 more battles in the Persian interior. You have the Battle of Jalula in 637, which allows the conquest of Western Iran, and then finally the Battle of Nahavand in 642, which disintegrates the Sassanid army. Yazdegerd is forced to flee to the Khorasan, but by that point, none of the satraps will support him, and he will not raise any more armies because he's just thrown 3 armies into the Arab meat grinder, and from this point, it's just a mopping up operation with under Omar and later the third Caliph, Uthman. The conquest of Iran is completed. Then from there, the conquests are halted when we have the coming of the 4th Caliph, Ali. Again, Ali is very important because he's the prime messianic figure of Shia Islam, which is very important for modern Iranian history. So Ali's rule is contested by the Umayyads because the previous Caliph, Uthman, was an Umayyad and he'd been murdered. The Umayyads believe the Hashemites, or the other branch of the Quraysh, responsible, and they demand Ali conduct an investigation into his murder. He refuses to do this, which launches the first fitna, or Arab civil war. Muawiyah, the leader of the Umayyads, he's the governor of the Levant, from his capital in Damascus. He's able to enlist the aid of Al-As, who was the Arab military commander, the conqueror of Egypt, who was able to reconquer Egypt for the Umayyad cause. And so, however, other than that, you have largely a stalemate in the rest of the Arab Empire. And what ends up resolving this is you have a radical sect of Sunni Muslims called the Kharijites. The Kharijites want a return to a more elected form of caliphate like the Rashidun, and they scheme to assassinate Ali, Muawiyah, and Al-As. They fail to kill Al-As and Muawiyah, but they successfully kill Ali, and as a result, the Shiite faction, again, the etymology, Shiite faction, the Shiatu Ali, or the party or faction of Ali, lose a lot of support after Ali's death, and so they capitulate and recognize Muawiyah, and he becomes the united ruler of the Arab Empire, and we have the creation of the Umayyad Caliphate. The Umayyads rule for almost a century. However, what is noteworthy is after he dies in 680, Muawiyah tries to instill his son Yazid as the new caliph. This is not very popular because in Arab culture there is a disdain against primogeniture, the idea that the elder son should inherit, and instead they prefer a form of agnatic seniority where the oldest male in the clan or family should leadership should fall to when the old leader dies. And so this leads to the second fitna, and the Aliites or the Shiite faction reattempt to try and claim the caliphate again for themselves. This time they're led by Ali's sons Hassan and Hussein. Hussein in particular, and Hussein, who's leading a force into Iraq. He is cornered by an army loyal to the Caliph Yazid at Karbala in Iraq, and he and the entire caravan of his supporters are massacred, and this is known as the Massacre of Karbala. And this again is after the death of Ali, you have the death of Hussein, and these are the first two imams or leaders of the Shiite cause, and these two great martyrdoms which would reverberate around Shiite history and theology. So from there, eventually Yazid is killed, and another Umayyad member, Abdul Malik, is able to reunify the empire, and from there he implements a more kind of seniority form of succession where he makes his son, I believe it's called Wazid, the caliph, but he decrees that the succession is going to pass horizontally. So Wazid's heir will be his second son, Suleiman, and then from there the caliphate just passes horizontally from brother to brother, then to cousin, then back to brother to brother. Though eventually, after this happens for a couple of generations, you have the death of the last great Umayyad caliph, Hisham, and you have the degeneration of the Umayyads, and another civil war breaking out until you have the coming of the last Umayyad caliph, Marwan. And it's actually from here that we get a very important event called the Abbasid Revolution, which is where the Abbasid clan, another clan related to the Hashemites, they were descended from the Prophet Muhammad's uncle Abbas. They're able to exploit a lot of dissatisfaction within the empire against the Umayyads, because the Umayyads employ a strict ethnic hierarchy. Only pure-blooded Muslim Arabs are to have access to the highest positions and to have a claim on the caliphate. And so many of the sort of converts, so especially the Persian converts, are completely shut out of the government and court and army. And also, to make matters even worse, the Umayyads decide that with the jizya, the tax you have to pay for being a non-Muslim, because they don't want to lose the income, they insist that all of the converts to Islam are still to pay the jizya, because regardless of their conversion. And so this again leads to even more resentment. And so in Iran, the Shia are seen as the most preferred candidate for creating a new caliphate. And so what happens though is the Abbasids are able to piggyback off of this, and they create a series of radical revolutionary cells where they essentially recruit people into this network. But when the members are recruited, they only know the members of the immediate network or cell. They don't know the leaders. And so all of these Shiite supporters believe that they are part of some plan to install the Aliids into power, when really it's there to put the Abbasids. And what really sets off the so-called Abbasid revolution is there's a wave of rebellions by the Kharijites again. And while this is going on, a Persian convert to Islam, Abu Muslim, who becomes very popular in the province here of Khorasan in northeastern Iran, he's able to rally an army amongst the populace, and he marches across Iran, conquering the countryside. And then from this point, the Abbasids then launch their revolution and declare their support for the Abu Muslim and to place an Aliyid or Shiite caliph and depose the Umayyads. The campaign goes very well, pushing into Iraq. After dealing with the Kharijites, Caliph Marwan is defeated by a member of the Abbasid family, Abdullah ibn Ali, who defeats him at the Battle of the Zab. And it's at this point that the mainline family of the Abbasids, so Abdullah's nephews, which is led by you have Ibrahim, Abul Abbas. Ibrahim dies because the mainline of the family are actually living in Jordan, but they then move over to Iraq, to the town of Kufa, which had been set up as a sort of Arab military barracks to fortify the area against uprisings, along with Basra. So the Abbasids move to Kufa, and from there they essentially pull their deception. Abdullah ibn Ali declares his nephew Abul Abbas as the caliph, and then from there they consolidate. Marwan is killed, and Abdullah ibn Ali has this great sort of what was supposed to be a sort of a reciprocal banquet to make up with the Umayyads, but it's a trap, and dozens of the Umayyads are killed at a sort of like this Arab red wedding, if you want to call it that. And so the Caliph Safa so Abul Abbas becomes the Caliph. He takes the name of Safa, which is interesting because under the Abbasids, you see this increasing Persianization of the caliphate. So the first sign is they adopt this idea of a lakab, or a regnal name, which is a old Sasanian tradition. So Abul Abbas adopts the name Safa, and the reason he does this is because Safa translates as blood shredder. So again, trying to instill a kind of fear into any Umayyads that may tear rebel against the dynasty. Though Safa doesn't rule for very long, he dies of smallpox in 534. So in 754, there's then a brief civil war where his uncle Abdullah tries to seize the caliphate for himself, but he's defeated by Abu Muslim, who sides with Safa's brother, who becomes the second Abbasid caliph, Al-Mansur. Al-Mansur, though, fearing the influence of Abu Muslim and his popularity in Iran and in Khorasan, has Abu Muslim executed. And from there, he then consolidates the realm. And because Kufa has shown to be somewhat treacherous, he decides to build a new capital. So he builds the city of Baghdad, though the official name for it was the Madinat al-Salam, or the City of Peace. And it's a great round city, almost like a kind of this Arab fortress, almost a bit like a, you could say, an Islamic forbidden city, if we're going to draw another Chinese comparison. And the reason he does this is that he wants his capital and center of power to be near the Abbasid power base in Iran. So again, the increasing importance of the Persians. And you have this increasing influence of Persian scholars. So again, many are brought to the courts, because you have the House of Wisdom that's set up in Baghdad. So you have people, and you have scholars such as Al-Baladuri, Al-Tabari, Avicenna, all writing famous work. So Avicenna was a mathematician and a poet. Al-Tabari and Al-Baladuri write these great works of history. You also have Hussein ibn Ishaq, who was an historian Christian. He translates a lot of older Greek works, such as Aristotle, into Arabic. And this was all done with the patronage of the Abbasids. They also adopt many aspects of Persian government. So they set up the concept of the divan, or government administration. They have viziers or wazirs as a kind of first minister. Also, unlike the Umayyads, which when they hold court, they would hold court directly and speak to their subjects. They adopt the Sassanid, the Persian practice of being screened by a clique of officials. However, there are still tensions. The Arabs still very much dominate a lot of the theological and priestly class, as well as the military officers and military soldiers. And there's a term that goes around they have for the Persians called Ajam, or the mumblers, because a lot of these Persians don't speak great Arabic. And it's also here that you have the movement called the Shubia movement, coming from the Islamic concept of shub, or respect, which is an idea that all Muslims are equal under God. And this is very popular amongst the Persian intelligentsia or scholars. And this was often sometimes taken to an extreme by some scholars to mean Persian superiority. And again, I've got another little quote I just want to read from Empire of the Mind. So, his first task is to attack the composition of the Quran and denounce its inconsistencies. If anyone in this presence acknowledges the preeminence of the companions of the Prophet, he pulls a grimace, and he turns his back when their merits are extolled, and then he straightway interrupts the conversation to speak of the policies of Ardashir Papagan, the administration of Anushirvan, and the admirable way the country was run under the Sassanians. Again, sort of glorifying the Sassanian Persian past. And furthermore, from this point, the dynasty really peaks under the reign of Harun al-Rashid, who rules from 786 to 809, and it's under him you have the rise of a powerful Persian dynasty called the Barmakid family. And the Barmakids, they were led by a fellow called Yahya, who was used as a kind of chief minister vizier by Harun al-Rashid, and he was almost even a father figure to the young caliph in his early years. But later, the Barmakids are later driven out from power by Harun al-Rashid, and this is despite the caliph being friends with Yahya's son al-Jafar. And there's an interesting anecdote about why this is, because al-Tabari, who I should note, who's a Persian scholar, claims that the caliph essentially basically enforces this. So Jafar was in love with the caliph's sister Abasa, and the caliph, and they were both drinking companions of Harun al-Rashid, and the caliph declares, well, if you love each other, you may marry, but this is to be a marriage of love only. There's to be no hanky-panky. And predictably, this marriage compact is broken, and they consummate the marriage, and Harun al-Rashid has Jafar executed. This conception of history is completely rejected by Ibn Khaldun, the great Arab scholar of the 14th century. He says, no, this is absurd by al-Tabari. What's more likely is that Harun al-Rashid realized how powerful the Barmakid family were becoming, and that rather it's very likely that he saw that because the Barmakids had by this point monopolizing the government, like so many court positions were held by them, they were almost a state within a state, and they had to be dealt with. And I'm actually of this rather view that it's kind of both are right. Perhaps Harun al-Rashid entrapped Jafar with this promise of this kind of marriage pact, which he knew he would break in order to have a reason to get rid of him. So, but after Harun al-Rashid's death in 809, you have his son Amin. Amin is now overthrown by his second son al-Mamun. Al-Mamun is aided in this by a Iranian Persian officer called Ibn Tahir, and as reward, al-Mamun grants Ibn Tahir the governorship of Khorasan, and this is the start of a period that's known as the Iranian intermezzo, which is a wonderful expression. It's coined by a Russian Orientalist called Vladimir Minorsky, and it refers to this period from 821 to about the middle of the 11th century. And it's as the caliphate is declining and decentralizing, you have the rise of these quote-unquote native Islamic Persian dynasties in Iran. And so you have the Tahirids in Khorasan. Later you get the Safarids in Sistan in southeastern Iran. This is both in the 9th century. This is very much exacerbated, though, when you get to the mid-9th century, because you have an event called the Anarchy at Samarra, which is where the Caliph al-Mutawakkil is deposed by his Turkish gulams or slave soldiers. This is largely believed to be at the instigation of his son al-Mustasir, who becomes the next caliph. And in the next 9 years, from 861 to 870, you have a rapid overturn of 4 caliphs. It's almost like you kind of like an Arab version of the crisis of the 3rd century, if you will. And it's during this period of chaos in the capital that more of these Iranian dynasties break away and form their own dynasties and states. And so, as you can see here, by the time you get to the 10th century, you have the rise of the 2 greatest of these dynasties. You have the Sassanids in Khorasan and Central Asia, and then you also have the Buyids or Buwayhids in Western Iran and in Iraq. And what's fascinating with the Buyids is, one, they're the first native Iranian rulers to use the title Shahansa since the Sassanids, so they revived that title. And what's also fascinating is they are also Shia as well, again, just drawing another long connection throughout the course of Iranian history and linking it to this wider series of Iran as this sort of Shia nation. Though what happens is the Buyids are eventually themselves fall into decline, and furthermore, you have the rise of what are called these sort of Persianate dynasties, so these sort of Turco-Mongol sort of dynasties who are heavily Persianized. So this starts with Mahmud of Ghazni, this Turk from Afghanistan. He founds this great sort of Ghaznavid Empire, which you can see here conquers most of Iran, Central Asia, and even Afghanistan, and pushes off into India. And to really link it into this idea of the prestige of Persian culture, he patronizes Ferdowsi, the grand poet, the author of the Shahnameh, this great sort of retelling of Persian mythic history. So again, really wanting to endow this art and culture to grant yourself sort of legitimacy to rule Iran. However, after Mahmud Ghazni's death in 1030, have a sort of decline where another dynasty comes in, the Seljuks. And so the Seljuks are led initially by ruler Tugril from 237 to 263. So 1037 to 1063. So he conquers most of Iran and Central Asia. A rump Ghaznavid state is left in Afghanistan and in Pakistan, which lingers on for about another 100 years or so from that point. But the height of their empire is gone once you have the death of Mahmud Ghazni. Yep, so the Seljuks come in, and then from there, so Tugril conquers, then also Mesopotamia. He conquers, obviously you can see Azerbaijan, and then he dies, and then he's succeeded by his son Alp-Arslan. Alp-Arslan doesn't rule for very long. He rules for about 9 years, but he's the one who then defeats the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, which allows him to consolidate Eastern Anatolia and the Levant, and then push on and overrun all of Anatolia, which would lead to the long-term Turkish conquest and settlements and assimilation of Anatolia as a Turkish realm. After the death of Arslan, though, that's very much the phase of conquest over. The dynasty focuses on consolidation, and again, this is where you see a lot more of the Persian influences, because again, under Tugril, they take the title of Shahansa, so again, the King of Kings. And what's really interesting is when you get to Alp-Arslan, he appoints a Persian, Abu Ali Hassan, as his vizier, and Abu Ali Hassan is given a title called Nizam al-Mulk, which is Persian for Order of the Realm, and he's effectively the one who's running the Seljuk Empire. So he runs it for the entirety of Alp-Arslan's reign and for pretty much almost of Alp-Arslan's successor, Malik Shah, who rules from 1072 to 1092. Malik Nizam al-Mulk is, interestingly enough, assassinated by the Hashashin, the Order of Assassins, which again is interesting because the assassins set up their own state called the Nizari Ismaili state. They are a radical sect of Shia Islam, and what's really fascinating is they use assassination as almost like a religious political tool. We're going to eliminate our political rivals as these kind of heretics, and again leaning more into this Shia idea of martyrdom and sacrifice and struggle against evil. Furthermore, one more point I want to make on the Seljuks is Nizam al-Mulk also compiles a book of governance called the Siyasatnama, which is a political treatise on justice and government. So again, the prominence is almost the Persian takeover of the Seljuk Empire. However, the Seljuks enter a period of decline after Malik Shah's death, and they split into two with a Western Seljuk realm and an Eastern Seljuk realm. And it's during this time that you see the fragmentation of Iran. So you've got it's almost this. By the time you get to the second half of the 12th century, you've got this rump Seljuk state in Hamadan. But you also see you've got the Abbasids, because what's fascinating is the Abbasid caliphs had actually been forced into a period of vassalage under the Buyids and the Seljuks, but they actually had to become independent again, and you almost had this period of a Abbasid revival from 1118 until the Mongol conquest of 1058. And it's actually under the Caliph al-Nazir, they're actually able to reconquer Western Iran. So, essentially the Abbasids become a regional power. What's also interesting, you've got other Turkic dynasties such as the Eldeguzids, who are in a Niziri dynasty. You've got the another Seljuk, Salgarids, Kerman Seljuks. But by this point, you can also see you've got at this point you have another dynasty coming in, the Khwarazm Shahs, who were vassals of the Seljuks up in Central Asia. And as the Seljuks collapse, they start to spread throughout Central Asia, and this then start pushing down into Iran proper. But it's actually a real tragedy when you look at the Khwarezmian Shahs, because their empire doesn't actually last very long, because their greatest ruler was Muhammad II. He essentially, because he becomes independent of the Seljuks in 1190, and he dies in 1220, shortly after killing a Mongol envoy sent from Genghis Khan. And so you can see that within 30 years, the Khwarezmian Shahs went from being this small regional power in Central Asia to ruling all of modern Iran pretty much, and Central Asia together. And that's all undone by this stupid move of killing the Mongol envoy, and then Genghis Khan organizes an army of 100 to 150,000 men, who then goes on the campaign of extermination through the Persianate world, sacking many cities and causing much cultural devastation. But it's from there you get something interesting happen. So after Genghis Khan, you then have the coming of his grandson Humayun, and after the Great Khan dies, you have his son Ogadai becomes the Great Khan, and then when Ogadai dies at the Kurultai, they make Kublai Khan the Grand Khan, and he rules China and Mongolia, and you have this partition of the Mongol Empire into the Chagatai Khanate, the Golden Horde, and then the Ilkhanate. So the etymology of the Ilkhanate, it means that the Khans are over there, and so Humayun becomes this. Sorry, not Humayun. Sorry, it's funny I made that confusion. Humayun is a Mughal ruler of India, but it's interesting considering the Mughals were descended from the Mongols, so it's fitting I made that mistake. So no, the actual name very similar. So it was Hulagu, who was the Il Khan. He becomes the first Il Khan, and so you can see the Il Khan was this division, Iran, Central Asia, but also they conquer Iraq, Azerbaijan, and they even vassalize the Sultanate of Rum in Anatolia. And they would even take over the rest of the Middle East if it wasn't for the Mamluks under Baybars defeating them at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260. But of course, The Mongols also sack Alamat in 1256, destroying the assassins and relocating them to the Levant. They sacked Baghdad in 1258, killing the Abbasid Caliph and forcing the Caliphate to relocate to Egypt under Mamluk protection. But again, as with the Seljuks, the Ilkhans become increasingly Persianized. I mean, the formal name for their state was the Iran Zamin, again, the land of Iran. And they actually make their capital Tabriz, which is the regional capital of Iranian Azerbaijan. So again, and something I forgot to mention was under the Seljuks, their capital was actually in Isfahan, which is a very important city in Iranian culture because Isfahan has a nickname of the Nash Af Jahan, which is Persian for the nave of the world or nave of the universe. And so again, a very important city in terms of Iranian culture and history. However, the Ilkhanids begin to collapse around the first half of the 14th century, and they fragment into a series of smaller Perso-Mongol states. You've got the Jalayirids in Iraq, you've got Achaemenids, Muzaffarids, of course, as well, the Sultanate of Ram fragments, and obviously from there you've got the Ottomans over in Anatolia. And out of this mess, we have the rise of Timur Tamerlane. So again, he's an Uzbek who is descended from the Great Khan, and if anything, he very much is very proud of his Mongol ancestry. And he attempts to sort of fuse elements of Mongol rule with Persian culture. And so he again launches another genocidal campaign throughout Iran. I mean, very famously, after Isfahan doesn't surrender to him, he massacres the population and stacks up columns of 70,000 heads outside the city, and later does the same with 90,000 heads outside of Baghdad. So Iran is absolutely devastated during this latter medieval period by the Mongols and the Timurids. But and then obviously Tamerlane goes along from there to go to Anatolia. He defeats the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid in 1400 at the Battle of Ankara, and then he's about to go on a campaign to China when he dies in 1405. And under his son Shah Rukh, because there's a brief succession struggle, a lot of the western provinces become these sort of independent Turkic confederations, and nominally you have the Kara Kalanu and the Ak Kalanu, the black and white sheep Turkomans, respectively. Shah Rukh rules for a long time. He rules from about 1405 to about 1444, so 1448, I should say, and he actually rules from Herat, which is in modern Afghanistan, which is again a very long Persianized city in Afghanistan and long seen as the important Persian cultural center. And so he rules from Herat, and you have what's called the Timurid Renaissance. And so while you're having the Italian Renaissance in Italy, you've also got this Iranian Renaissance going on in Iran under the Timurid patronage. And there's also a lot of learning going on because Shah Rukh's son Uleg Beg is actually an astronomer. He sets up his own astronomy tower in Herat, and unfortunately, when he finally comes to the throne, he's killed and murdered within a couple of years, and the Timurid Empire sort of fragments and breaks apart. And then from there, I mentioned the Kara Kalanu and the Ak Kalanu. Well, the Ak Kalanu are largely centered in central Anatolia, and the Kara Kalanu are based in this Tabriz region. They duke it out for about 20, 30 years after the death of Shah Rukh, but the Ak Kalanu win in the end, absorb the Kara Kalanu, and then from there, under their great leader Usun Hassan, who rules from it's about 1452 to about 1478. He as you can see, conquers all of Iraq and most of modern Iran, and though he does suffer a setback against the Ottomans, again he's able to forge this empire again in Iran. And this is where I'm going to leave it off, because this links nicely into the next episode where we get into the rise of the Safavids, because Shah Ismail, the first Shah of Safavid Iran, was a grandson of Usan Hassan. And I just want to address a couple of comments. So we've got Shriv Goji. One can say that this was a total war in the same sense as the two great wars of the last 100 years, and as those that left Europe hollowed and broken. So this is one left near the Near East Open as well. Yeah, certainly. I'm interested in how much continuity you see between Old Persia and Muslim Persia. How much did Muslim thought change Persia and its folk? Would you do a stream about Zoroastrianism as it is today? I would need to look more into that modern Zoroastrianism to really comment that. No, I see a lot of continuity between pre-Islamic and post-Islamic Iran. I mean, it's one of the reasons of doing the series, and I think that will become more obvious as the series goes on. So stay tuned. And then Tamerlane was not from Genghis Khan, owing to this he never became Khan, only Emir. He takes on the Chinggisid daughter as wife so that his sons may be Khans, hence the Gur Khans or in-laws of India. Sorry. Yeah, you're right. What I meant to say was, he marries a woman who's descended, and then he takes a title saying, heir of the Khan. I think it's called, the Gur Khan. Thank you. Yeah, so it's so much history I'm having to read and go through, so I got a little bit of it mixed up in my head. But yes, and obviously later, after you have the fragmentation of the Timurid Empire, you obviously have this Timurid Prince Baber from his position in Kabul in Afghanistan goes on to found the Mughal Empire. Right. Okay, and well, that was the end of the stream. So thank you all for watching. I hope this has been a good introduction to many aspects of Iranian culture and history in preparation for the series I'm going to be doing with Hunger. Episode 1, we're going to be covering the early Safavid period. So we'll start with the rise of Shah Ismail in 1501 AD, and we'll end with the death of Abbas the Great in 1624 AD. So, yeah, we had one super chat earlier by Hunger, which we've already read. We don't appear to have had any others. So, AI Shia Homelander, I recommend the book Eagle and the Lion by Adrian Goldsworthy from pre-Christian, pre-Islam rivalries between Rome and Iran. Yes, I am familiar with that book. I've not got around to acquiring it, so I may do at some point. Yeah, well, thank you all for watching, and have a good day.